Imagine the consequences of your child not being understood. In fact, being misunderstood, and how that can impact your child. Better yet, imagine your life, you, and imagine a time when you can think of when you were not understood by somebody. They didn't get you. You didn't feel seen or heard or understood by them. They didn't get it. And they're trying to communicate with you. Imagine how frustrating that is. All of us can think of times when this has happened. And they continue to communicate with you, not understanding you, and you're trying to get them to understand you. It's so frustrating. It feels so bad. Now, imagine what the consequences are that for your child. When we don't understand a child, when a child feels misunderstood, they get worse support, not better support. And one of the worst things about this is that there are unreasonable expectations placed upon them to do something or perform in some way that they cannot do. Imagine the situation you were thinking about with yourself. Imagine the unreasonable expectations they had for you and how that feels. That's what we're going to talk about here today. I'm going to talk about a concept called asynchrony. I'm not talking about asynchronous classrooms or asynchronous learning, and that's a new term in the vernacular. We are not talking about that. This is a much older concept from the gifted world that I'll be explaining today. Regardless of whether or not your child is gifted, this video will help you to understand your child and thus better support your child and help them get what they need in school and in life. And I'm going to talk about asynchrony. I'm going to talk about three things: what asynchrony is, how to reframe asynchrony, and three, how to support your child. So let's go ahead and set this up. What is asynchrony? I'm going to give you 6 points about what asynchrony is. Again, first point is this is not the same as asynchronous learning. That's learning which ideally is taking place wherever and whenever you want to be learning. It's a very relaxed schedule for learning. You get to go at your own pace. And during the pandemic, a lot of talk about asynchrony and asynchronous learning started bubbling up to the surface. So that's what that refers to. We're not talking about that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 out of 6 is that asynchrony is usually a term used in the GT, gifted and talented tag worlds. But again, anyone can watch this video, parents and teachers. This is for all of you to understand, any kids, because all kids learn asynchronously. It's just to what extent. But it is very noticeable. And the asynchrony is more exaggerated in the gifted world, and we'll talk about that in a few moments too. Number 3, asynchrony is about how the brain develops, how our brains develop in an asynchronous fashion, in an uneven way, if you will. So imagine that there is developmentally, people's brains can develop in a typical manner, but you can also imagine that many people's brains or parts of their brains develop in an atypical manner. For example, we can say a 3rd grader developmentally oftentimes is in a place to learn cursive and multiplication tables, things like that. Okay, that's 3rd grade. But there are some students who learn those things earlier and some who learn them later. So how is the brain developing in different ways? And so asynchrony would be looking at what are the parts of us that develop atypically, not typically, atypically, not standardized, not according to standards and developmental norms, okay? Because people are very different. So it drives me nuts that we have such a standardized system that's so inflexible in certain ways. Keeps people stuck. Number 4 out of 6 in terms of what is asynchrony about, I'm going to give you a couple of other examples to help you really understand asynchrony. You can have asynchronous development in terms of academics, so you can have students who are in very different places academically in different subjects and so on and so forth, or intellectually or cognitively. You can develop asynchronously socially. Socially, we can see kids who have very different maturity levels socially at different ages. You can develop asynchronously as far as emotional regulation is concerned. Are we able to regulate emotion in a really great way and really have tools for that? Or developmentally, is that really difficult or challenging for us? You can also look at things like the physical body and what's called fine and gross motor development. So, if somebody, for example, let's say that they're a high schooler, but it's still really difficult for fine motor to control a pencil and to do certain fine motor things, or it's really easy and they're really detailed with those things. So, fine and gross motor, how the body moves. And another huge way, and that we really see this in the gifted world, is sort of developing asynchronously in the brain in terms of how intense we could say somebody is or how sensitive they are. Now, people can be very sensitive, highly sensitive. There's that term HSPs, highly sensitive people, but we can be highly sensitive in terms of our physical sensitivity. So a child has a really strong sense of smell. Smells can really bother them, or touch. They don't like to feel the tags on their shirts, maybe, or visually stimulated by everything. So very sensitive, maybe as far as the senses are concerned, but also emotionally. Some kids can be very emotionally sensitive or deep, and this intensity can show up. And again, a lot of times this happens in the gifted and talented kids. So now I'm going to give you a really strong example in terms of asynchrony that has to do with the physical body. And this is just a really easy one to identify. You can easily think about a upper elementary or middle school classroom or class. Let's say hundreds of kids in elementary or middle school class. But let's say that these kids were born on the exact same birthday. They're the exact same age. Well, you can have one student or one child who's 4'6" tall, and another student standing right next to them that was born on the same day that's 6 foot tall. So there's a great example of asynchrony in terms of physical development that just helps bring this idea to a more concrete level. And the last thing I'm going to say about examples here is a really interesting example of asynchrony was Einstein. Einstein had a speech delay and didn't speak until Einstein was 5 years old. So, or didn't speak sentences. So imagine that. This person who's known to be one of the greatest geniuses of all time had a speech delay. That's a pretty extreme asynchronous development. The brain was still developing, obviously, in tons of ways, but that speech took a while to come out. Number 5 out of 6 in terms of understanding this. When we look at asynchrony, again, regardless of whether or not your child is identified gifted, let's not worry about that right now. Let's just look at your child's gifts, regardless of whether or not they're gifted. They have gifts, right? So think about your child's gifts or your gifts. Sometimes the gifts can overshadow the challenges or delays or disabilities, whatever term you prefer to use there. Sometimes the gifts can overshadow them. A good example of this is when a child is gifted verbally. They can communicate at such a high level. You got a 2nd grade kid talking about dinosaurs to an adult, and the adult's going, "Whoa, you're using words I've never heard. I don't even," they're speaking on such a high level about this area of interest, for example. So in that kind of a case, there can be a big misunderstanding where a parent or a teacher will say, "Oh, that kid is so bright," but they're really looking at one very concrete strength that this child has that's so apparent to everybody because it's so concrete, in this case a verbal gift, and yet they're maybe never turning in their homework. Maybe they're really immature when it comes to social things or emotional regulation or things like that. So you can see that there's a problem when we misperceive and we think, "Oh, this kid's bright," and then what I said at the very beginning here, the expectations, the unreasonable expectations. This kid's really bright, so they should be able to do blah 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 blah. They must not be trying. This is a huge problem we have. Now the opposite can happen too, where a child's disabilities may overshadow their gifts. So people may not even know that this child has gifts, or this comes into a sentence on not everything that's measured matters, and not everything that matters is measured, which I'll go into in just a moment. So I'm going to stop there on that. And finally, number 6, we're going to talk about 2E. 2E. Twice exceptional kids. Twice exceptional refers to people who are one exceptionality, they're gifted and talented. They're legitimately gifted in some area. And 2, they have a legitimate learning disability or challenge area. So this is a human who has both. This is my favorite type of people to work with, is 2E kids. They're very complex human beings that are very misunderstood. So When I think of 2E, a term that my brain likes to think of with 2E is super asynchronous. The gap between their different challenges and strengths is huge, and that can really make them very complicated people to understand. So that is going to give you a good idea of what 2E is, I hope. Next, I'm going to talk about how to reframe it, and then I'm going to talk about how to support your kid. How do we reframe? How do we rethink the way we look at this? Because we want to serve our kids. A reframe is when you look at something, you put a different frame around it so you have a different perception of an idea. And one of the things that I like to think about when I'm thinking about the kids that I'm working with is not are they gifted or not, but I want to think about how is this child gifted? So whether or not they're formally diagnosed with gifted. I want to look at kids and say, how are they gifted? And I'm encouraging you to do this. How is your child gifted? Talents and gifts, though those are different terms and have different implications, but similar. How is your child talented? And how might your child have developmental delays or challenges or disabilities? So I want to encourage you to pull out a pen and paper at some point and really write that down. What do you think your kids' gifts are? What do you think their talents are? What do you think their challenge areas are? And really make a huge list of everything you can think of, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. And when we are looking at how to reframe things, one of the biggest things I want to reframe is the can't and the won't. When we misunderstand and have unreasonable expectations of a human being, and we assume that something's a won't, that they just won't try hard enough, or they're just being lazy because they won't apply themselves, or they won't motivate themselves, or these sorts of things, which do not make sense. They might make sense to the adult who's thinking it, but it doesn't. It really is a misunderstanding of the reality of this child. The difference between the can and won't can be very damaging to a human being. It's very shaming when we misperceive, have unreasonable expectations, say, you just need to try harder, you need to stop being lazy, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you need to care more about school. These sort of shaming comments we don't need to use. They influence how we support kids in a negative way because we're going to support them in ways that don't work. And sometimes when one of the ways that we support them or try to help them when we perceive that it's a won't is we will use things like punishment, as if punishment is going to give them the skills that they need, or to motivate them to do better. It doesn't work. Or rewards. I'm going to promise you this reward. I'll give you $100 if you get an A, or blah, blah. That does not give them the skills to do what they're being asked to do. Or nagging or lecturing them, using logic and reason to help them to see the light, or fear or anger. So we can use many ways to motivate someone, and that can be very shaming when we perceive that it's a won't. So we really want to reframe it, as I started here, to really see it properly as this is a can't. They don't have these skills to do what we're asking. And a lot of people at this point say, yeah, but Seth, I've seen them do it before. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but that's a misunderstanding too. So if that's going through your head, please understand that. And then finally, last thing we're going to talk about today is how can you support them. I'm going to give you 5 ideas. Parents, teachers, 5 ways. Here we go. Number 1, I want to encourage you to, what I said before, notice how they are gifted, how they are talented, how they are struggling, what challenges they're having. But not is my child gifted or talented, but what are your child's interests, gifts, talents, passions, which is used and misunderstood word, but you can write out their passions, and what matters to them, what's purposeful, what's meaningful to them, those sorts of things. Write that out. Here's why. It's really important that we see each child's unique needs. Schools oftentimes don't do this nearly well enough. What are your child's unique needs? Regardless of what the school does, we want to do what we can do to support their unique needs, whether it's strength-based or whether it's helping support them through their challenges. That was number 1. Number 2 in how to support them is build on their strengths. Strength-based education, you can research that, but building on your child's strengths, to me, is where it's at. Our kids are going to build their careers. They're going to build great lives, happy, healthy, successful lives based on their strengths. And so many of us, so many of the adults that you know have spent so much time, maybe decades of time, spinning their wheels, going in directions. We all know adults who are going, yeah, I just changed everything in my life. I was going this direction for so long, and it wasn't aligned with who I am and what I need and what I believe and what my values. We want to help build people's strengths. And when we can do that with kids earlier on, especially for these kids who don't fit in the school box, that is going to really help them to create a better adult life, which is what we want. We want to see them happy. Number 3, how do we build these strengths? Well, one of the ways that you parents and teachers can do that is by learning about the term, Google the term enrichment and gifted. But from the gifted world, there's a term called enrichment. We all know what enrichment would be in many different contexts, but in this gifted world, it's a really important word. And what enrichment to me means is, how can we give kids educational opportunities? I'm not saying academic or school necessarily, because education happens anywhere. But how can we give them rich, interesting, experiential, meaningful, purposeful educational experiences that they're called an enrichment? I mean, this could be a summer camp, but this could also be going to the creek and looking at the animals in nature there and talking about it and learning. Anyhow, how can we create enriching experiences? That, to me, is a great way that we build strengths of a human being. Number 4 of how to support them: love and accept your child. Love is an action. Is love a feeling? Yeah, we can talk about it as a feeling. I'm talking about love as an action. What does that mean? Love is an action. The way we treat people, communicate, speak, act with people, that is love, or not loving. But we want to love through action. Now, more specifically, what I want to talk about here is learning about what's called attachment theory. There are many ways to learn about this, but you can look up attachment theory. What you want, what I want, what all human beings want, what your child wants, we want to feel like we matter. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like a part of something. How do we do that? We have people in our lives who we're close to, who we feel that we're seen by them. We feel heard by them. We feel like they understand us. They get us. They care about us and they accept us, but they've got our back. They get us. They see us. We feel seen. We feel heard. Okay? Attachment theory is a lot about how we do that, how we feel seen. And when I said love and accept them through action, my encouragement is the actions are to help them to feel seen and heard. Now, number 5, the last one. How do we do that? I would say the best way to, if we really want to support our kids, that I would say the best way we do that is doing our own deep inner work. So many parents I work with are like, Seth, I didn't know how much working on me was going to help everything. That's kind of the big irony that we find out. But doing our own deep inner work, whether that's our own as the adult therapy, or support groups, or research, or reading, or learning, or growing, or pushing ourselves, or meditation, or emotional regulation, or dealing with our own traumas, or our own baggage, if you will, or whatever. Our own deep inner self-work, our self-care, how we care about ourselves. Are we modeling self-care for our child? Because they're learning what we model, things like that. So to me, doing our own deep inner work allows us to prioritize the most important things. And what the most important thing to me is not school, not executive function, not even all these things I'm talking about, but what it really comes down to, in my opinion, is relationship and mental health. Those are number 1. Our relationship with our kids and their mental health. That's really number 1. So the deep inner work really goes that. Anyhow, my name is Seth Perler. I'm an executive function coach, speaker, wear a lot of hats in the neurodiversity, ADHD, 2E worlds. I love what I do. If you like what I'm doing, please go ahead and share this video with someone right this second. Click share. Go ahead and click a like. That helps me with the algorithm stuff, whatever the heck that is. But I'd really like to see a comment below from you. How is your child, or a child that you care about, how are they gifted and talented in a way that is not measured? Remember, not everything that's measured matters, and not everything that matters is measured. A lot of these amazing kids are not seen for how amazing they are in certain domains. What's a unique way that you can share with all of us so we can think outside the box about our kids? How is your child gifted or talented in a way that's not usually noticed or measured? go ahead and share it below. Obviously, give a thumbs up. Subscribe on my site. I got freebies there for you. I send out stuff every Sunday. I got a great summit coming up in August. It's my 5th year doing this Executive Function Summit for parents. And got some courses and other good stuff for you. Anyhow, my brain's fried because I've been recording for you here for 20 minutes now. And aloha, have a fantastic day. I want to wish you peace in your heart, joy, and connection with the people most important to you, especially those kids in your life. Take care.